So I wanted to talk just a little bit about political extremes on the left and on the right and the dialogue within the church. A lot has been made lately of civility and trying to bridge the gap between what is becoming a very polarized, especially in the United States, polarized political environment. I want to use some of President Oak's clear thinking on this with civility. I've been told several times in comments and emails and contact submissions on my website that I'm not being civil, and other people say, "Hey, you're doing a great job." I just want to point something out that I think is very important to understand about the idea of civility in a polarized, an ever-increasing polarized political environment. First of all, I don't think it's uncivil to go after ideas and words that fall along the fringes and along the extremes. I think that's an important thing to do. I think that we also need to separate the ideas, words, and actions from the person as much as possible. And I try to do that. You'll notice in several of the videos that I've done, say, for example, of BYU professors, that I don't bring up their names, even though I know them. I don't want to do that. I don't think that is civil. And I know many of you have pushed back on that, and you think, hey, let's fire them, let's go after them. That's not something I'm willing to do, right? It's got to be over the top for me to be able to do that, unless, of course, they're public, right? But that, to me, is civility. Secondly, there does need to be dialogue. So, I've got ideas, I've got opinions. I go after things that I think are extremes. I will be going after more things on the right as well that are extremes. The difference right now for me is that the left, the hard left, let's keep that very clear, the hard left is what is overcoming or overtaking the institutions in the United States. It's not the right that's overtaking the institutions. It's the hard left. And so I do go after those more because I see that more as an immediate threat. That doesn't mean that there isn't a threat on the right. There is a threat on the right. The threat on the right is almost always a reaction to to something moving very hard to the left. And then you end up with a very hard right reaction. And that's often very ugly. And so it's something that needs to be addressed. And if we end up going harder and harder to the left, I'm very concerned about that reaction. I see the two sides of the political spectrum, if we must use a linear left-right political spectrum, as the right is a wolf, the hard right. The hard right, the far right, is a wolf. And the hard left, the far left, is a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're both wolves, and they both cause destruction. And it doesn't matter which one is worse, right? It's kind of like I did an interview earlier this year with the authors of the Radical Orthodoxy Manifesto. That was Jeffrey Thain, Nathaniel Givens, and J. Max Wilson. And you ought to go take a look at that. And they talk about going through Scylla and Charybdis, I think it is, a Greek myth, where you have these two extremes. You have to go through this strait near Italy, and it comes from Homer, right, from Greek myths. And, one side I think they're both sea monsters. One's represented by like a rocky coast, and the other is a whirlpool. And you have to kind of navigate and try and stay away from both extremes. I think that's important. But I would look at it more this way. I don't think that we need to just put a political spectrum out there that is linear and just left and right. I think it's so many things are not left and not right, but you end up with two different teams. I don't want one of those teams. I think it's better to look at trying to hold the center, not the center of a linear political spectrum, but rather more like a bike wheel, where you have the axle at the center, and out from there come all of the spokes. And the spokes lead you to extremities. And so it's not that you need to be moderate in the middle. I don't think that's important. What does that mean? I understand you're staying away from maybe two extremes, but moderate really isn't a political philosophy to me. So if you're at the center of a wheel and you're not willing to go out to the extremes, I think that's a better example. And I think that's where you can avoid this bipolar political situation that we're getting into. And at the same time, you can take positions and sides sometimes. Maybe it's one side, then it's the other. But to look at this as it's only two choices makes no sense to me. I think that in the church, we need to open dialogue. We need to be able to have discussions point by point by point, not team by team. I think that's a huge mistake. I gave up on party politics 30 years ago. And I think it's the worst thing for America. I really do. And a lot of you aren't going to like hearing me say that. But I think it's destroying things. Now, as I've gone out and I've gone after words and actions and ideas, ideologies such as critical race theory and critical social justice, something I really focus on, that to me can be done in a civil manner. I think that's what I'm doing. I believe that's what I'm doing. Some of you may not agree with that. I would love to have a discussion about that. Talk to me on the comment section. Send me an email. Go to my website and go to the contact submission and tell me about that, because I think it's crucial to have the dialogue. I was listening to a podcast just the other day. I think it was Patrick Mason, the scholar Patrick Mason, that was on there, who definitely leans to the left. And he had said something that I fully agree with, and you guys probably agree with me as well. You would probably agree also, and that is that in the church, there's kind of this nicey nice culture, right? It's almost like it's superficial sometimes. It can be. It comes from a good place, as Patrick Mason says, but sometimes it's kind of nicey nice. There's nothing wrong with talking about things. There's nothing wrong with opening up a dialogue. These things need to be fettered. They need to be discussed. And that's what I'm trying to do. I don't think that if you're not attacking a person individually, if you're not treating someone without respect, then I don't think it's an issue of civility there, right? I think it's a matter of ideas. And those things need to be talked about. I see a lot of podcasts, a lot of video, a lot of audio that talks about church issues, and everybody just seems to oftentimes be skirting around the issues. It's like they don't want to address them, and I think that's a big mistake. I think you need to dial down and talk about the issue and exactly what the problem is. I'll give you an example of that. One of them is Elder Holland's talk at BYU a couple of weeks ago. I've listened to 3 or 4 podcasts on this, and it's almost always the same thing, whether it's on the left, we might call it, or on the right, or whether if it's a disturbance from the talk of Elder Holland or a support of Elder Holland on the talk. It's talk about what the issues are, not what the distractions are. The issue that is brought up there, 2 things, is radicalization of the students. I know this is true. I know he's getting these letters because I get copies of these letters. This is not a fake thing. I'm not saying it's an epidemic at BYU, but it does happen. And it happens under the mentorship and guidance of some of the professors there, right? So that's one of the things that I think Elder Holland was really talking about. But the other one is the doctrine of the family. Now, you may not like the doctrine of the family. You may want there to be same-sex marriage. You may like the doctrine of the family and you don't want there to be same-sex marriage. But that is one of the major issues of that talk. And nobody goes out and specifically talks about it. Give you an example. If you were talking about, let's say that Elder Holland said something along the lines of, he still talked about the valedictorian. He still talked about the muskets and the rounds and all that stuff, right? But then he said something to the effect of, well, we can see in some cases in the church things can change. For example, with the doctrine of the family, we don't know what the future holds for us there. That's what I hear a lot of podcasters say, right? What if Elder Holland would have said that? Do you think people would be up in arms, metaphor, with the muskets and with the valedictorian? No, they wouldn't care. Those aren't the issues, right? The major issue there is the doctrine of the family, and basically Elder Holland kind of circling the wagons around that doctrine. Again, you may not like it, you may not believe it's permanent, but that's the issue, and that's what needs to be discussed. And it's just skirted around all the time. I don't quite understand that. We need to be able to talk about the issues directly. The other thing I'll bring up about Elder Holland's talk is the muskets, right? The thing I want to come back and use some clear thinking on that also, on this, because this is what I'm trying to do. So if I'm bringing up critical race theory, right, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to do exactly what Elder Maxwell, Elder Oaks then, and Elder Holland brought up, which are the muskets and the trows. Think about the position on this, right? That the trows are building up the temple or building up Zion. And as you are doing that with a trow in one hand and building up Zion, what are you doing with the musket? You're not going out sniping people. You're not a sniper going out trying to get people. What you're doing is, because you have the trow in one hand and you're building up Zion, you've now got the musket pointed outward to defend what you are building, right? It is for defense. That's what that is. I'm not going to drill deep into this in this episode, but please keep in mind, I think that we need to really start working on rules of dialogue, not just let me build my social media group around me and I'm going to get all the likes because I'm preaching to my own choir, right? Whether I'm on the left or I'm on the right, we need dialogue. And I would like to have that much more in the church. That doesn't mean you're going to come to an agreement. It doesn't mean that you have the same opinions. But we need to understand each other and have a human interaction to some degree on these ideas and on these thoughts and actually talk about the issues. Otherwise, they're just going to keep building up and building up and building up. This is like an unhealthy relationship or an unhealthy marriage where neither side ends up saying anything that bothers them, right? Or they suppress all of the issues instead of talking about them in a civil manner. They may not agree, the two spouses, but it's healthier to at least talk about it and be civil about it to the other person. We're living in a world where information is at our fingertips. We can design the information that we're going to get. We can create our own social networks. And we don't look to the other side at all in terms of a dialogue. And I think that is an important step. Otherwise, we're just going to dig ourselves in harder and harder on each side. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with the other person or the other side. It just means that there needs to be a dialogue in place. Because otherwise, we're going to get more and more polarized. And that's not a good thing for the church. Zion comes first, not our political parties, not our political ideologies. It's the Lord that we want to look to. It's the tree of life that we want everyone to assimilate to move to the same point. I've just spent a little bit of the last week kind of noticing this idea of civility that's out there, which is a very important idea that is somehow conflated with the idea of not, honestly, not using a musket to defend what you're building with a trowel, and to not go after bad ideas, extreme ideas, anywhere on the political spectrum or anywhere one of those spokes lead to. I think that's a bad idea too. And I think that's really one of the messages that Elder Holland gave us. I'll talk to you next time.